Sometimes I encounter a new word, look it up, and then just 10 minutes later I see it again and realize I have completely forgotten its meaning. I have to open the dictionary all over again. I wonder if there's a better way to hold on to these new words. Our teacher thinks this question is quite interesting. She explains that it's absolutely normal not to remember a new word the first time you see it. We often have to check a word 5 times before we really commit it to memory. Some words, often verbs, might require 10 or 15 repeats. When we learn a new word, the process goes through several stages before we can say that word is truly ours. Only by reaching the last stage can we say we know the word inside and out. In the first stage, we see or hear the word for the very first time and don't know its meaning at all, so we look it up in the dictionary. In the second stage, we see the word again, and we remember having come across it before, but we still can't recall its meaning and have to look it up again. In the third stage, we recognize the word and sense its meaning. It might be an animal, an object, or perhaps a verb, but we're still not completely sure. In the fourth stage, we instantly understand the word whenever we see or hear it, but we can't produce it spontaneously. At that point, it's in our passive vocabulary. Only in the fifth stage do we manage to use it naturally when we speak, so it's in our active vocabulary. Understanding these stages clarifies why it's not realistic to remember a new word perfectly the first time you come across it. That would mean jumping over all the in-between stages in one go, which is impossible. We need multiple encounters, reading or hearing the word, so it can progress step by step until it's firmly in stage 5. We can also celebrate progress whenever we move from one stage to another, because that shows we're getting closer to using the word effortlessly in everyday situations. This insight makes sense to me. I used to feel a bit foolish for forgetting a word right after looking it up, but now I see it's perfectly natural. Everyone needs multiple introductions to a word before they can truly remember it. After class, I head out to football practice. Our coach mentions a game on Saturday against a school team from Cambridge. He asks me to join our squad for the match. I'm thrilled and can't wait for the weekend. When it comes to really learning new words, I now know I should plan on encountering each of them about 10 times, maybe more, before I can easily recall them. The next day, one of my classmates brings up a question about how to improve listening. Comprehension. He wants to know the best way to train his ears to catch what people are saying. Our teacher answers that having strong listening skills is essential for holding a conversation. If we don't understand the other person, we can't reply properly. There are plenty of materials online in English, but finding ones that suit our level can be tricky. She notes that there are basically 2 kinds of resources: audio content like podcasts and films or videos. She says that with audio alone, we should already recognize about 95% of the words. If there are too many unknown words, we should try to read a transcript first and make sure we understand everything. When working on listening, the main goal is to capture the spoken information, not necessarily to pick up new vocabulary. Of course, we can learn some new words that way, but it shouldn't be the focus. We should look for material that isn't too difficult. She recommends using simplified audiobooks when possible. If we have a simplified book that includes an audio version, reading it first and then listening can be very helpful, whether at home or on our commute. As for films and videos, especially on the internet, she suggests we wait until we know around 2,000 words in English to get the most out of them. A good tactic is to watch a film with subtitles the first time, then watch it again without subtitles so we can train our listening skills. Rewatching a film we enjoy can also help, because each repeat viewing adds to our understanding. It's also a good idea to watch videos on topics we like, such as nature documentaries or reality shows, which are often simpler to follow because of their repetitive structure. Our teacher emphasizes that we should listen for at least 30 minutes every day, and we should focus on how much we do understand, rather than on what we still miss. Listening is the easiest form of practice because it requires no special effort beyond paying attention. By listening frequently, we can gradually boost our comprehension. The classmate who asked the question thanks the teacher and says he finds this approach useful. He takes away the point that listening at least 30 minutes daily is the key to progress. On Friday, our teacher asks us to recall our initial motivation for learning English. She wonders if we remember the exact moment we began studying it in earnest. I share that I do recall when I first started developing an interest in English. She invites me to tell the class what happened. I explain that I originally found English difficult in high school. The language structure made no sense to me, and I struggled with vocabulary and grammar. By the time I graduated, I was still only at a beginner level and believed I would never get good at it. I figured I just wasn't wired to learn English. Then, around age 20, I started listening to the Beatles and wanted to understand their lyrics, so I began translating their songs. Gradually, I picked up more and more words, and then I ended up meeting two ladies from England on a train. Even though we had only a simple conversation, I realized I actually could communicate a bit. After that, I started working on English. Nearly every day, made significant progress, and eventually decided to go to England to improve even further. My teacher thanks me for sharing. She points out something interesting about my story. I was essentially the same person before and after. The main difference was that my motivation changed. Initially, I had no real reason to learn, but then I wanted to understand songs. Motivation, she says, is a powerful factor in learning. If we have it, success is much more likely. Without it, the journey is far more difficult. She asks others in the class about their reasons for studying English. One girl loves reading historical works in their original language. Another student dreams of being a top tennis coach and wants to speak flawless English. Someone else hopes to work for a major international firm. Everyone seems to have some personal or professional drive to learn English. We see that these motivations, whether for direct communication or to access information, keep us moving forward. At the end of the class, the teacher asks if we like English. I admit I used to dislike it, but now I'm fond of it because I see how helpful it is and because I enjoy aspects of English-speaking culture. The teacher mentions that taking an interest in anything related to English, music, people, humor, history, can make studying feel less like work. She also notes that a good benchmark for comfortable communication is knowing about 3,000 words. If we don't enjoy the language, Getting in enough practice to reach that number can be a real challenge. I agree completely. These days, I'm not only a fan of the Beatles, but I also like my teacher, my English boss, and even English humor. Finding time for daily practice is a lot simpler now. On Saturday, I play football with my school team. We have some excellent players and win 3-2. We celebrate at a pub afterward, excited about our victory. Back in class, someone asks how to learn 3,000 words. The teacher says we can certainly Google lists of the 3,000 most frequent words, but those don't necessarily help us master them in context. Learning words in isolation can be okay for very basic ones, like simple nouns we can visualize, but it becomes less effective as we move beyond 1,000 words. After that point, it's often best to see words in full sentences within stories. We learn words naturally when we see them repeated in context, just like how we learn to speak our own first language as children. This method continues all our lives as new words show up. She points out the example of the word Google used as a verb, which none of us learned from a memorized list. I tell her that makes sense, and she reminds us we can stop relying heavily on word lists once we've built a foundation. Immersing ourselves in English, reading stories, talking to people, or listening frequently is more efficient for growing our vocabulary. I appreciate that advice and keep it in mind when I head to work later. At my job, I'm beginning to understand my tasks well. Serving drinks and simple dishes is second nature now, and my confidence is going up, so I sometimes venture into slightly longer chats with our regulars. Then one day, something surprising happens. A pair of Scottish customers comes in. The man speaks English, but his accent is unfamiliar to me. I can't understand him and worry he's asking for something we don't serve. I call my boss, who has no trouble at all figuring out he just wants 2 coffees and sandwiches. After they leave, I apologize to her for not understanding. She reassures me and says it's perfectly normal to be caught off guard by a new accent. Later, I describe the situation to my teacher at school. She advises that if we aren't accustomed to a Scottish accent, we might need to spend some time listening to it specifically, like watching Scottish TV series or comedians online. She explains that our ears just need a couple of weeks of exposure to adjust to unfamiliar accents, and that there's nothing wrong with our English when that happens. The next day, 2 tourists walk into our cafe. Their English is obviously at a very basic level. My boss switches to simple sentences with only 3 or 4 words each. The customers understand, order coffee and sandwiches, and leave happy. I tell my boss I'm impressed by how she adapts her language for others. She explains that meeting customers where they are is simply good business, because they're more likely to come back if they feel comfortable. She's probably right, as we're usually busy. When I share this at school, my teacher praises my boss's approach. She reminds me that even people who speak English well can simplify their language for beginners if it helps them communicate. Then she begins talking about proficiency levels and what learners can typically handle at each stage. Around 1,000 words, we can at least discuss everyday topics, even though sentences remain short. Around 2,000 words, we become more comfortable covering most of our daily experiences, though deeper topics might still pose a challenge. 3,000 words is where things really open up for broader, more nuanced conversation. By then, we can talk about almost anything. That afternoon, the same two ladies returned to the cafe with more friends. This time, I handle their orders, myself, using short, clear phrases. They explain that they're tourists from Japan and appreciate that people understand them here. That makes me proud, and I see how stepping down to their level lets us connect. Then someone in class mentions being shy about speaking English. The teacher shares how this is perfectly normal. We're doing something we aren't completely confident in, and mistakes are guaranteed. She admits she felt the same way when she first started learning other languages. We might still blush or stumble, but the only path to improvement is using the language anyway. She points out that we should recognize the progress we've already made, because having even 1,000 or 2,000 words is valuable. It's better to focus on the fact that we can already hold some kind of conversation instead of berating ourselves for not speaking perfectly. Another student says he often stops mid-sentence when he realizes he doesn't know a particular word. Feeling stuck makes him embarrassed, and then he avoids speaking in future. The teacher suggests learning how to describe the missing word instead of giving up. For instance, if we don't know key, we can say, the small thing that opens a door. Since we probably won't ever know as many English words as we do in our native language, describing unfamiliar words is an essential skill. She proposes using thinking aloud, a regular practice that improves our ability to talk around vocabulary gaps. She concludes by stressing that it's okay to be shy, but it shouldn't stop us from opening our mouths and gaining the practice we need. We can only learn to speak English by actively using it and by being open to mistakes. I find all this practical and reassuring. I also notice that the more I try to speak, the less I worry about looking silly. My teacher has convinced me that every slip is simply part of the process. By the end of the week, I feel far more relaxed about my interactions at work, whether I understand every accent perfectly or have to rephrase something when I get stuck.